The left is using ideology as a fact, and the right is using facts as ideology. In both cases, it doesn't lead to any conclusion. And the reality is that they're just fighting like those wrestlers who pretend to fight and not really fight, because the real thing, what really matters, is the money that's being wasted, our money, our next future generation's money, which is being thrown out of the window, which is being appropriated, misappropriated by all these oligarchs and elitists. That's the real problem. It's not about the so-called partisan politics, the culture wars. These are all pretexts. What's really happening is that they're stealing our money. It's June 27, 2025. This is Cream Telco. For the year, we are down 14.6%. The market's up 4.2%. We are underperforming by 18.8%.
A political episode, and like here at Not Even on Podcast, we really talk about almost anything that we think is important for the hedge fund business in general, and that covers a lot of things. That covers literature, it covers business, it covers economics, and it covers politics, of course. And this is one of those where we just want to dissect US politics once and for all, the way we see it. I think we owe this to our listeners. I think we owe this to ourselves, actually, to be clear about where we stand and what we actually want. Now, I'm going to give the conclusion right away and then explain. So the conclusion is that we are hijacked by a political class or an elite class or an oligarchy. You pick your name, and it's not really important what we call it. What's important is there is a certain class that has access to money, and the money is at this point not even the taxpayer money. That's not even the issue anymore. It's really the debt, the deficits. I mean, we have such large deficits that the actual money that is discretionary money that can be spent and over which people can actually fight politically is not even that big. It's the debt and the future generations' money that we're wasting that is the problem. So we're hijacked by this political class, and that is very bad for the public. It's bad for, in particular, the people who are sort of perceived as losers in the game of capitalism. So the poor, the disenfranchised, they are being, for lack of a better word, screwed by the system because they face inflation, they face tougher access towards essential services, in particular education and healthcare, because of this dysfunctional policy that the elite is pouring down on us, whilst the elite is, of course, pushing relentlessly towards their interest, whether it's enriching themselves directly or indirectly by advantaging their offsprings. For example, I have a friend of mine who certainly you would say that his son is just academically not even close to the level that you would expect for a student that wants to study a STEM field in a prestigious university, and lo and behold, somehow the son still is going to study in a decently prestigious university, and how that happened, I don't want to know, but it certainly did not happen through the channels of meritocracy. So that's just one example. But I don't want to talk about this particular case. I want to talk about the left and the right. And one thing that occurred to me recently, and I think this is the root of the problem, it's that the fight between left and right really is just a pretext fight. It's like that wrestling match where people pretend to fight when in fact they're not fighting at all. And it's all for show. And the real issues are about money, and there the elites totally agree. They have a separate system, of course. The right is more sort of, attracting funds through the oil and gas industry and the military, and the left more through NGOs and pretext social issues. Where they do agree to fight is the stuff, the cultural stuff, whether transvestites should be allowed to participate in women's sports, things like that, that don't have monetary implications but are make good for headlines. And I think the slogan that I want to sort of overarch this episode with is the left is using ideology as fact and the right is using fact as ideology. Let me dissect that a bit. So the left is very ideological in a sense that they have almost utopic ideas of how society should function, and then they are doing what politicians tend to do, which is they're turning that ideology into a fact. So, for example, I recently heard a progressive commentator say that left-wing run cities like New York or LA are safer than right-wing cities like Nashville or Oklahoma, and that's just obviously not true. But they turn these types of false facts into facts in the pretext of ideology. Or another way to say this is that ideology comes first, and then you fit whatever you need to fit into. You massage the facts such as that the ideology can be supported by the facts. So they would say things like the same commentator actually said that the right-wing government under Trump is against free speech, and that they were always against, the right wing has always been against free speech. For example, during COVID, they were telling people what to do, when the fact here is, of course, is the exact opposite, that during COVID, the progressives were imposing masks and lockdowns on everybody and canceled anybody who wasn't in the party life. So they're turning, they put the ideology first. So this is sort of the something that you see a lot on Wall Street, for example, where people have beliefs, ideas about stocks or companies, and then they massage the facts such that they support their argument. It's also called overconfidence. I think that's a psychological term, but fundamentally, it's what drives the frustration of, let's say in this case, people who genuinely would like to support progressive parties, in other words, Democrats. They just get frustrated with their politicians because they see that the facts that the narratives are not true. And that's, in my opinion, one of the main reasons why the Trump movement and the MAGA movement won the election, and why, at least amongst most people that I encounter, common sense, which is kind of what the MAGA movement encompasses, is prevailing. Now, on the other side, the right wing, so the right side of the political spectrum, is turning facts into ideology. So, in other words, they say that just the fact that, for example, illegal immigration is happening, and we have actually 20 million illegals, that in itself is an ideology which needs to be fought. Now, of course, the reality is much more nuanced than that, which is, on the one hand, we have illegal immigration, but on the other hand, we need to discuss why that's the case, whether we want it, why we want it, and not turn it into a fact that that's a bad thing and that it needs to be somehow erased from the political spectrum. It's the same thing happens to, let's say, the conversation about NGOs. They are the fact is that most of NGOs are corrupt and they're being used as a slush fund for political interests. But there's also the conversation of, okay, but that's not an ideology now. We should not be ideologically opposed to NGOs, and unfortunately, that's exactly where the narrative is going. So, in both cases, I think we're losing trust in the political system, and the reality is that in both cases, the only interests that political operatives really care about is the money, the slush fund, the big spending that they can pursue through being in politics and having power and spending other people's money. I think the proof of this has come in the last few weeks through the way Doge and Elon Musk have been treated by the Trump administration and more broadly by the Republican Party. Let me elaborate on that. When Trump got elected, obviously highly supported by Elon Musk and Silicon Valley, the deal was that he's going to do something about the deficit. And then Doge was created for that particular reason, to drain the swamp. He ran on that ticket, drain the swamp. Now, I think if you're going to have a hard time finding anybody who doesn't have skin in the game. In other words, anybody who is not politically involved in this misappropriation of funds, who would argue that it's a bad thing to bring transparency to the government, to cut wasteful spending, to cut fraud. I think you'd have a hard time finding it. So in other words, that's common sense. And the conclusion amongst most people on the sort of Trump supporters, or let's call it us Trump supporters who came new to the party, so we're not political operatives, we're not traditional Republicans, we're just anti-elite politicians. We want them to do what they're supposed to do. We want that transparency. We want all these good things. So anyway, so that's what we wanted. The reality was the Doge didn't get anywhere. And it's not because the Democrats opposed it for various reasons, but we thought that the Republicans would support it, and they did not. In other words, they showed their hand, and they did exactly what you would expect them to do in a situation that I described in the beginning, which is that analogy with the wrestling match. They quarrel about a few billion here and there, and they make that a big deal. And I think it's about I forgot some minor issues. That's what they quarrel about. When in reality, the trillions that are being spent on wars and healthcare and those sort of things, which are the real problems of our society, are not being tackled. And that, to me, is the proof that we are, in essence, victims of a political elite, both right and left, it doesn't matter on which side, which has only one interest, which is to enhance their own profiteering and at the expense of the public, and most important, and this is my personal issue, at the expense of future generations. I think a society that is undermining its future generations is a society doomed to fail, and vice versa. A society that invests heavily into a betterment for future generations is a society that has future and potential. And unfortunately, we are, at this point, our society is the former. The same applies to Europe, where I am right now. Here it's even worse. I think young people are disillusioned. Young people have, it shows in unemployment, it shows in affordability issues and all that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, the problem is on both sides of the Atlantic the same. A political class of elitist politicians on both sides of the aisle are raping financially the system. In Europe, it's not just financially, but also with regulation. In the US, regulation is fortunately at bay. But the fundamental problem really is, what kind of society are we gonna leave for future generations? This is my personal concern. I think it's my duty as an adult to not just have kids, which is one thing I am doing, and I hopefully will do in the future, but also provide a better future for them. And I think that's what Doge and generally Elon Musk and most of Silicon Valley is trying to do. Of course, they're doing it on their own dime with a self-profit motive, but fundamentally, that's the outcome. If we have better technology, if we have more innovation, then we also have a better world for the future. And this political class, this anti-Doge movement in Washington, D.C., is opposing that. So the conclusion is that, again, I think the slogan fits really nicely, that the left is using ideology as fact, and the right is turning facts into ideology, and both are counterproductive, both lead to mistrust, and most importantly, both are just pretext arguments to divert from the real fight, which is the fight about funds and that has very bad consequences for the public and in particular for future generations. Thank you.